Well, hi, everybody. It's Kim Winter, Logistics Executive Group. Welcome to our latest session with supply chain leaders and business leaders around the world. Before we start and introduce our guest today, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Darryl Judd in Dubai. Darryl is, as many of you will have seen, is our Chief Operating Officer for Logistics Executive Group on a global basis, and also the MD for our Corporate Advisory and Mergers and Acquisitions business. Darryl, welcome.
Kim, thank you very much. Pleasure to join you this afternoon.
Great, thanks. And without further ado, all the way from Russia with love, we have our two guests who, I'll give you a bit of a background on them in a minute, but Andrey Lukin, welcome.
Thanks a lot, Darryl. Very pleased to be here.
And Andrey, you're in Moscow?
Yes, I'm in Moscow at the moment, Kim, yep.
Yeah, good stuff. And Alex Borisov. Alex, I believe you're also in Moscow.
Yes, I am, and thank you for having me today.
Hey, welcome, and thanks very much for joining us, guys. We can assume that you're somewhere around zero about this point in time?
Approximately, yeah, but I guess that the springtime is kicking in slowly but gradually, so it's improving.
Nice to hear, nice to hear. So, look, fantastic to have you join us today, and you're somewhat closer to the time zone than some of the guests that we have from around the world. So welcome again, and we really look forward to having a lively discussion with you today. And I've got Darryl along as a specialist in some of the areas that I know you guys have been operating. And in fact, as a disclaimer, Darryl, I think you ran into the guys in Oman some time ago.
Yes, correct. Yeah, we had the pleasure of working together on some projects down in Oman and looking particularly at e-commerce and postal hybrid products, etc. And it was really fascinating to get a good insight into what's really happening in that e-commerce world, and more importantly, what's happening behind the Iron Curtain there in Russia, and just excited by the growth. So it's fantastic, and looking forward to chatting further on that, guys.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Darryl. So Andrey and Alex, you two are really quite interesting characters in terms of your international experience. You've both worked in many different countries across the supply chain. And interestingly, hopefully we hear a bit today about how you work together as well as a 1-2 team in various countries. So quite unique. And we certainly, Darryl and myself, and I'm sure our audience will be very interested to hear some of your inputs and some of the reflections about where you've been working and what you've been doing. So without further ado, what we'd like to do is, as we do with all of our guests, is hear a little bit about your upbringing, right from the very earliest days as kids, where you were brought up, what sort of an environment, and how you got to the early stages of your career. And then I'm going to throw to Darryl to talk a little bit more about the career in recent times until now. So, Andrey, maybe we can start with you. Where did it all start?
Well, listen, it all started in the Soviet Union, actually. So I think I'm one of the last generations that have, been born in the Soviet Union, been born in Moscow, and spent pretty much my entire childhood here up until 1992, when my whole family moved to a different country. That was Pakistan, where my father was engaged on a construction project that had lasted for about 6 years. So the entire family had moved, and that was my first exposure to, international experience, because I kind of lived in Pakistan, but I've attended the American school there. So there were a lot of Americans, there were a lot of Koreans, Chinese people. So it was a very interesting international experience. And after 6 years newer there, we came back here to Moscow, and I've continued my schooling years. And then I got a bit excessive in terms of my further education, because I think I have three degrees, 2 bachelor degrees, 1 master's degree, all economics and management related. And after that, in 2007, basically started my career. It was not logistics related at that time, because I've worked for the Russian nuclear authority called Rosatom, and that was an interesting experience to work for such a large state corporation. Started off as a deputy project manager there, and then progressed into one of the Russian private oligarch groups, working for a media branch there. And I was working in the strategy department there. So I considered those years in that company in particular being very beneficial in terms of building various consulting skills, framing skills, analyzing various problem solutions, comparing various things, which was very, very helpful in my further career, which had started in 2013 when I've entered the logistics world, and I've joined one of the Russia's top B2C express last mile companies, which was called SVSR Express. And there was an ambitious target back then to develop the cross-border business for the company, because that was exactly the time, 2013, when the cross-border logistics had really started picking up in Russia. So a couple of very, very exciting years ahead with that project, doing mostly support jobs, operational jobs, a bit of a business development as well, analytics, and we built a pretty decent business. So all the big names that have been entering the Russian market, we were practically the first ones to be working with them. And some years later, after that, SVSR Express was acquired by the famous Geopost Group, which is a part of the La Poste in France. And there was a merger between the DPD brand in Russia and SVSR brand in Russia. And when this merger was complete, this acquisition was complete, I was appointed as the director for international business development, with one of the key tasks there to actually merge the two businesses together, which we have done with quite a large team there. It was about 15 people that I was managing at the time. And after this project was complete, I have received a very interesting offer from a region about which I haven't heard a lot before. And I have accepted that with a lot of excitement and never regretted that. Spent some wonderful couple of years in the Middle East, supporting various logistics projects in the area, and trying to apply my expertise and knowledge to build something tangible here.
Awesome. So I know that
today.
Sorry, yeah, and I know Darryl want to drill down on that journey from that point onwards shortly. But so before we move on, so Alex, upbringing, background, where did it all start for you? And tell us about your early journey.
Well, the origin is the same. Born in Soviet Union, as my passport still states. Didn't have such an eventful childhood. I spent all my childhood years in Russia. Basically changing a few schools and then entering the Academy of National Economy, which was one of the best business and economics institutions in Russia. I also had an urge for education, so I finished the same university. I graduated from it 3 times with 3 different diplomas. I have a specialist degree in management. Specialist is somewhere between a bachelor and a master. Spent 5 years education on that. Then I finished another master's degree in project management. And then I also hold a translator from English diploma from the same institution, because since the very childhood, basically languages were my affinity. I've had a very good connection with languages. My first language was, believe it or not, German, and English I picked only after that. Now I'm enhancing my arsenal up to 7 languages that I'm able to speak fluently, so that it really helps me communicate with the different world and really connect with other people when I talk in the same language to them. I consider this a definite advantage. But actually, and my very first job, it's not listed in any track record that I actually have mentioned. It was when I still was a student in my 3rd year. And my very first job was I worked as a part aboard a cruise ship, which was a Russian river cruise specifically dedicated to foreigners that wanted to really, come and look at Russia, how has it changed since the Soviet Union times, and what the beauties there are of the Russian rivers and the Russian cities. And I spent 3 months there working just aboard a ship as an so-called administrator, but I did performed a lot of different duties. This is how I got my first-hand exposure with various people and businessmen from America, from Brazil, Europe, China, and other places. After that, my track record, after having graduated, my track record led me to be an economic analyst for 2.5 years for a certain trade house. So really working on some budgeting and formatting and installing those budgets, which really helped me grasp a good understanding of how the economics of a firm works, how the business models and financial models work. And after that, basically my international track record and exposure started, because I joined a Swiss branch a Moscow branch of a Swiss consulting firm that specialized in advising German-speaking regions, basically Austria, Germany, and Switzerland, how best to enter Russian market. And I spent 3 months in Zurich after that as my first posting to do that and help them really adapt their products or services to the Russian market. And after that, having finished this consulting part, I actually also joined the SPSR Express, the same company that helped me develop more into the logistics and e-commerce sphere. I joined it slightly before Andrey in late 2012. And this is ever since we have been working together, as you, Kim, highlighted in the beginning. My task was mostly on the front end there. It was the business development. It was the sales from the get-go. And initially, basically, it was only like 4 people, Andrey, right? From the very start, you, me, and 2 of our directors that were really developing on this particular unit from scratch. And it was like from zero revenues, we were able to elevate it to the 30% of the entire revenue of the company by the end of my career with SPSR. Over basically 5 years' time, we managed to do that. And as our directors were leaving for pastures new, for better offers that they got, I basically inherited the entire unit, and we were the leading directors of the entire international unit for SPSR together with Andrey. Then this entire eventful merger happened also with DPD Group, and at that time, I also believe that maybe my job was there complete. I really brought a lot of money for the owners, and because also DPD Group mentioned that one of the key factors that helped them acquire SPSR Express was also the successes we enjoyed in the international market. And we were working with all the major brands, and our name was really a brand name in China and Europe by the time. So I thought it was time for me to also look for new challenges. And this challenge also happened to be in Oman, a bit unexpectedly for me, out of the blue. Received the offer to work in the Middle East, and same here. Never regretted it since, and was very happy when also Andrey joined the same effort, the same team some months later, so that we could continue our journey of creating value together.
Awesome. You guys have been busy.
Absolutely, yeah.
Isn't it? Sort of nuclear to Pakistan and to other things. It's a fascinating story, both of you guys, yeah?
Over to you, Darryl. Take it away.
It's really interesting just listening to the guys, and you know, we often sort of forget, you know, the geographic size of Russia. And Kim, they talked about DPD and GeoPost. I mean, that e-commerce market has really started to shift in Russia, and I think for a lot of us that aren't exposed to that every day, we don't see it. But e-commerce, particularly cross-border, really is accelerating in Russia. Is part, what's happened since COVID? Have we seen an uptake like the rest of the world? Is it going to continue to mature the way it has?
Well, actually,
Alex.
Yeah. Well, actually, with COVID, we're looking at some very interesting tendencies in the Russian e-commerce market, and we can talk about it first. Yeah. So, according to the data of National Association of Online Trade, the one that we have in Russia, the entire e-commerce market, both cross-border and domestic, is $43 billion in 2020. Yeah, and it grew by 58%, and of course, a huge part of that growth was, of course, influenced by COVID, especially by major food retailers entering the market, because some of the main grocers chains, they grew 200%, 350%, basically a lot. But a very interesting thing is actually that the international segment, the cross-border segment, was only $6 billion last year and constituted to be 14% of the overall e-commerce market. And it used to be 30% before that. So now we can really see why it happened, because of the disruptions in logistics due to COVID, because the borders were closed, because the lead time was prolonged, and because of various cancellations. Yes, there was an uptake in e-commerce. People wanted to shop, especially during the lockdown times. But also at the same time, in the beginning of 2020, in the first half of it, the logistics didn't perform as it was. So we now see that the cross-border portion for 2020 diminished. But we believe it also happened only because of COVID, But in the second half of the year, the logistics industry really did its best, enhanced the supply chain, enhanced the lead times, and we believe that this is going to be on a recuperating streak following from now on. But these are the latest figures for the e-commerce market.
It's really interesting. One of the things that I know we experienced here in the Middle East, and I'm sure it's reflected elsewhere in the world where we have a mix of developed and developing economies, is that a lot of the retailers were sort of scrambling to put omni-channel e-commerce solutions in place. It had been an agenda item for a long period of time, but they were still working through that. And of course, then COVID hit, and as one major group said to me the other day, they learned 6 years catch up in 6 days when they had to go through the execution and put in place. Was that a similar experience for a lot of the homegrown retailers and merchants in Russia, that they didn't necessarily have the advancement in their e-channels and COVID sort of forced that? Would that be a fair submission?
Yeah, maybe I can pick up from that one. Yes, the answer is absolutely yes. I have been now it's kind of March, so there are a lot of various conferences, online conferences, kind of describing and meditating on 2020. And one of the bottom lines is that yes, the old classic retailer models are shifting towards online because they just don't have any other options, because the stores were closing. A lot of other things, lockdowns with COVID have happened. So yes, they have had no other choice but to move online. Plus, the online segment in Russia is quite actually ready to accommodate this volume and to serve the wider public. So it's a very hot topic nowadays in Russia.
I bet it is. Andrey and Alex, has that meant that the infrastructure that supports that, last mile connectivity, digitization, dark stores, all of that's also had to be matured as well? Are we seeing more investment in those areas as a result of that demand driver?
Alex, you want to pick up on that one?
Because you got SF Express, Alibaba have come in. I think there's a number of others that have moved into the region, right?
Yes, we see those tendencies, of course. The logistics infrastructure in Russia, the way that you look at it, of course, you need to remember that it has had some certain heritage, and I'm sure Andrey will be able to shed some light on it, how it actually developed the state that we're currently in. But when you look at this thing, there still is a huge opportunity, because the major online retailers, they estimate there is a gap, for example, in fulfillment warehousing of 1 million square meters, and a lot of new players are coming in and they're taking up this particular space. They see the opportunity for investments coming in. For example, we can highlight that the major Russian logistics provider, the designated operator, Russian Post, they have plans of investing, I think, $4 billion within the next 7 years into infrastructure, be it sorting centers, because they try to decentralize everything. Everything is concentrated around Moscow currently, and Russian Post is trying to build up various facilities in Siberia, in Far East, to accommodate the traffic. We also see cases where large giants like Alibaba are coming into Russia with their Cainiao provider, which is basically the logistics arm of Alibaba. They did it differently. They spent a long time structuring the deal and actually entering it in partnership with Mail.ru Group, which is one of the largest internet groups in Russia. But the way they do that, they concentrate mostly on online retail, because Cainiao basically integrates existing providers onto their network. They do not really build anything from scratch. But now it's one of the most important logistics providers, because they have integrated customs clearance, last mile and first mile, and basically they are an alternative, fully catering to the needs of buyers from AliExpress platform. So that's how we see it developed in the past years.
Yeah, maybe Alex, I would just add in a little bit, because to understand how logistics works in Russia and why it works in a certain way, you have to understand a little bit of the background. There's an element of Soviet heritage in how logistics is developing in Russia, because previously, in those times, 50, 60 years ago, the large industrial groups in Russia, they have adopted the model of owning all the assets that are associated with their business. So I'm not just talking about a production plant in a logistics branch, which is obvious, but everything ranging from a kindergarten for the employees' kids to hotels in Siberia, Crimea, or other areas where their employees in particular will be spending their summertime. So this had its own transition from the past into the present. And actually, this explains why the level of logistics outsourcing in Russia is substantially lower than in the rest of the world. So in Russia, that rate, this percentage is somewhere around 20% of outsourced logistics operation, while in the rest of the world, it's somewhere between 35 and 50. Yeah, so that actually explains, the room for growth. That explains what Alex have been saying about Russia Post, that they're developing, new areas and new infrastructure. And two other things about Russia logistics is that you have to understand that there's a lot of space in Russia. We obviously
it's a big continent to get across, right? It's a big country.
Yeah. So to get yourself from point A to B might be a serious challenge. So this requires a lot of investment into the road infrastructure. Yeah. Plus the climate here is obviously it's not the best welcoming. Yeah, for that. And this also explains the population density, because the most populated areas of Russia are the central and the south. So all the logistics capacities are mostly centralized there. And another aspect of logistics is also the air infrastructure, because most of the air line hauls, they are routed through Moscow. So sometimes if you want to go from, A to B, which is relatively not far away from one another, you have to actually make a U-turn through Moscow, because just that's how the line haul works. And that's why you mentioned, Darryl, e-commerce in particular, which is an interesting one, because the logistics for e-commerce, it exists slightly outside of this heritage. Yeah. And that explains this is one of the reasons why it's growing so dynamically.
Yeah, but there is also an interesting bit about logistics for e-commerce, is that when this e-commerce boomed, I think in the early 2010s, right? The logistics companies, they were not ready to accommodate the volume. They were not ready to have it delivered at the very speed and quality that those marketplaces and online retailers demanded it. This is why what we see now, that I think all major marketplaces have their own in-house logistics that they use only to deliver their own goods. We do have like 3 or 4 major retailers in Russia, major marketplaces in Russia, and all of their logistics is basically in-sourced. So they did that because at that time the logistics companies were not developed enough to do that. Now it's all changed, but still this heritage still remains, and still a lot of volume is being processed by those in-house marketplace logistics courier companies.
Yeah. So if I'm listening to you, it's the choice to insource at the marketplace level is driven by the maturity level of the infrastructure needed, and the low rate of outsourcing has led to concentrated networks of owner-occupied networks, which are hard to obviously outsource and buy capacity on. But I guess that presents an interesting opportunity, because if you look at the size of Russia and the CIS and just the strategic corridors that sit there, to your point about fulfillment centers and hubbing inventory, that demand for additional property will grow as more and more organizations either want into the market and need a connected network, or alternatively look to push out into new markets within the same region, but now need that infrastructure to do so, because holding all the inventory in one location is obviously very costly, but more importantly, the consumer's demand is, I want it now, right? And,
exactly.
I'm not prepared to wait that sort of 3-4 days, and which is one of the challenges in a big country like Russia, where you've got tyranny of distance and all those sort of elements come into it, right? So I mean, that's got to create an opportunity for the international players, surely.
Yeah, absolutely. There still are a lot of gaps that the international players can close. Actually, a lot of you said at the very beginning that Russia has been growing at a very steady rate in terms of the GDP, and a lot of this growth pre-COVID was fueled by foreign direct investments, and this is still what can give additional momentum to the logistics industry as well, because there is a lot of opportunity and a lot of gaps to fill. Plus, Russia now on the governmental level is piloting some of the things that are, very common elsewhere. For example, bonded warehousing systems. Right now, it's an only experimental project that launched in a city called Kazan, which is also in a part of central Russia before the Urals. on the Volga River. And so far, only Russian Post has the exclusive rights to pilot it for a certain number of time, maybe like a year or a few months. But after that, this practice will become more and more common. And of course, you need to move the inventory, be it bonded or non-bonded, closer to where the people consume them. And why is this important? And when you look at the structure of how people are buying online, you see that a lot of volumes are coming from the regions, not only from Moscow and St. Petersburg. And a lot of this volume is basically being sourced from China, because these Chinese volumes have attractive prices and attractive assortment to all the people that live in those regions. And the logistics there, as Andrey has just mentioned, is not very well developed yet. This is why this gap of trying to bridge it in the regions and make the logistics more affordable, faster, and quicker is a huge source of opportunity, definitely.
So you guys are at the forefront of it. You're seeing it every day in the work you do there, consulting to international organizations who are looking to develop strong networks and supply chains inside Russia, but also connecting outside. I mean, how much interest do you solicit and do you see in the market from overseas companies, wanting to come in and deciding, like Alibaba, now's the time I want to lay that infrastructure. There's a roadmap for me to be able to put a bonded warehouse. There's a roadmap for me to move part of my inventory out of China and put it closer to my European network. Are you seeing a lot of interest, and is that resulting in a lot of deal making, a lot of M&As and joint ventures in that marketplace? Because we seem to read about it regularly.
Well, one of the aspects here is obviously this conversation around sanctions. So what I have been personally hearing is that there is a lot of interest, like you're saying, to move into Russia, but there's also caution in terms of, okay, well, how does this actually work? I mean, what is going to happen in a year? So it's also a certain forecasting element that sits behind it, and it's a purely economic and political conversation, because otherwise, market-wise, I mean, the opportunity is there. It's absolutely available. There are good market studies. Everything is developing. But I think that this element is kind of holding back certain brands when they're trying to enter.
So the risk mitigation elements, yeah.
So there's a risk mitigation. So, but those brands that are courageous enough to enter Russia, so to speak, they usually succeed. We had a very interesting example with the international UK brand called Next, which have been operating a drop shipping model with us. They were one of our first clients back in SPSR, and then they have decided to open up their own warehouse, and they actually have moved in. And that happened in the time when the sanctions have only started kicking in. So they have been entering the market in the most kind of dangerous time, so to speak. But nevertheless, I mean, the logistics market is the logistics market. It's not very heavily predicated on these international cliches that sit around.
Goods have to move, right? People buy, people sell.
Absolutely. So that was a purely business decision. So they have just decided that it's more profitable for them to set up their own operation there. And Russia Post is doing the same thing. I mean, the development and logistics that they're doing is happening in partnerships with international companies. And there's a bunch of other examples available out there as well.
Yeah, so as a rule of
sorry, Alex, where you go?
Yeah, sure. As a rule of thumb, if a foreign retailer has enough volume to be successful in Russia, they would go and do that. Because apart from Next, we also have the case of iHerb, for which Russia, I think, is in the top 3 countries. And guess what? From the drop shipping model that they employed at the very beginning, they localized. They opened a few warehouses. They're piloting this particular bonded warehousing model. Everything just to consolidate and make more gains on the Russian market. And the same case was with Alibaba. Yeah, why did they enter for the first time in their history? Why did AliExpress had a JV and entered a separate country? Exactly because they saw the potential and because the volume was so huge. So that now up to 25% of the entire AliExpress Russian volume is actually being generated by the local sellers and local manufacturers. They saw the value. They saw the huge traffic that was in Russia, and they came in and they localized. That's how we see it happening before.
So when you guys are engaging with international companies looking to enter Russia, what is the advice you give them and the best way to enter that marketplace? Is it to go down that partnership route, or is it to build it and thou shalt come model? Or what's the advice that you give them as the easiest low risk way to penetrate Russia?
Well,
Andrey,
actually depends on the. It really actually.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, Andrey, you go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. I think it really actually depends on the business itself in terms of what they want to do.
The business model.
Yeah, on the business model, and various examples like we have already discussed. They have worked. So opening up your own warehouse. Well, that is a way to go if you have a lot of volume. If you don't have a lot of volume, you can use some other routes enabling you to enter Russia. But there are more and more opportunities appearing, because I even know that the Russian marketplaces at the moment, they have started introducing an opportunity for international brands to actually onboard these marketplaces. So I think the next, now the step is quite easy. So they're just enabling some brand from Belgium or from somewhere to onboard a marketplace. I think the next step behind it is actually building some international logistics infrastructure within Europe or within other regions that will actually enable those brands shipping into Russia. And this is another model that also sits there as well.
It was really fascinating. Kim, I don't know if you were down at Gulf Foods last week here in Dubai, but we had the big exhibition for the food industry, Gulf Foods, which is an annual event. It's a global event. It attracts thousands and thousands of attendees. But I have to admit, for the first time, having sat there, and I've been there many, many times before, every time I sat down for a cup of coffee, or we were having a salad at one stage, and just listening to the different accents around and seeing where people are coming from as visitors, the proportion of Russian speakers and Russians attending Gulf Foods, and more importantly, representing Russian produce in Gulf Foods and looking to push out into the international market, particularly in the agriculture space, certainly blew me away. I mean, there was by far, and it's the highest proportion I've seen. Is that something that we're also starting to see, that Russian industry and agriculture is now looking for channels outside of Russia to push themselves into those international export spaces?
Yeah, most definitely, because Russian agricultural industry has also made a lot of gains in the past years, growing more crops, harvesting more crops, exporting a lot more than we used to. However, this also has direct connections to logistics, because when we were speaking to some heads of a Russian agricultural expert union, and basically they said Russia does have harvesting fields, so we can produce a lot of stuff that other people might need, but we might not have enough logistics capability to actually haul everything out from Russia, because the main bottlenecks here are actually railroad connections that lead directly to the ports. They say there is not enough cars, railroad cars, to carry out enough produce to those ports. There might be issues with available vessels, even though this is a problem to a lesser extent. So basically what they highlighted is more investments into railroad infrastructure is needed if we really intend to become even bigger exporter of agricultural produce. So this is another opportunity for foreign companies to take a look at this particular segment and maybe upgrade it.
Yeah, I was amazed actually with the number of prepackaged value brands that, and maybe it's a bit of my naivety, but they'd taken the Russian brand, rebranded into a Western format. Some of it was incredibly good, and that's their export channel, and it's those organizations that seem to be dominant, and they're actively looking for distribution partners, new markets, new channels. And I think that's certainly, Kim, you've attended Gulf Foods many times. I don't know what your take is on it, but there was a lot more of an aggressive push this year, and a lot more activity around that space. I mean, Kim, I wasn't there last year, but how does it compare to previous years?
Oh, I think there's a real resurgence. I think over the last few years, Russian investment in Dubai has probably been down slightly for a range of reasons. But when I first came into the Middle East 20 years ago, Russia was an extremely dominant force from an investment perspective. Right across the board, and in fact, fair to say, I think not necessarily being an expert on these economic matters, but a big extension of the growth here has been from Russia and in the Eastern Bloc down into the UAE and the GC in general. I've just got a quick flip. I want to flip back to you, Andrey, further to your discussion, Darryl. We've been talking about size, scale, dimension of the market, and we're talking about e-commerce and consumer patterns. For our audience, give us some big picture numbers about Russia. I mean, how big is the place? I mean, a lot of Americans will tell you they don't know much about much going on outside of America, let alone Russia or China. And also then want to flip to, the trade I know is going on between China and Russia. But tell us, how big is Russia? How many people? What's the size of the place? Because you look at it on the map, it's bloody enormous.
Well, I can tell you that. I mean, the population is around 140 million, which is not very big. The area of Russia is I can't pronounce that number. I'm afraid.
I'll just write it out on the screen. You're talking to two blokes. You're talking to two blokes that come from a country of less than 5 million people, mate. I mean, small number.
Well, let's see. If when we talk about Australia, we talk about roughly the same size as the US. How many times can we fit the US or Australia into Russia? It's got to be 4 or 5 times, isn't it?
US should be about 4 times, I think. Alex, correct me if I'm wrong.
I think it's smaller than that, maybe only 3 times. But yeah, the place is pretty stretched, pretty enormous. Various geographic locations. From we get the temperature Florida-like in our southernmost regions in Sochi, and then we get absolute Arctic Circle temperatures up there in the north. So yeah, the place is big, the place is enormous, and a lot of people actually live, as Andrey said, concentrated in the eastern area, in the central area as we call it, and then there's also certain population density levels in the Far East, closer to the China border. And in the Siberia, this is where people live and make a living harvesting resources there. And yeah, I think the main trade partner of Russia, I'm sure of it, of course, is China. The trade growth and the trade levels have been enormous. Yes, we can pull out some data regarding the national trade, but I can only tell you that in e-commerce, China dwarfs everything. 90% of all cross-border e-commerce volumes come from China. In terms of money, it's only closer to 50%, in terms of value, but in terms of sheer amount, it's absolutely enormous and dwarfs everything else. I think the second trading partner for Russia after China in the e-commerce sphere in cross-border is European Union. 22% comes from EU, the larger EU, of course, together with the UK before they departed, and 11% comes from America. By people from America, and the rest of it, it just rest the world. So even there, the clear priority is China.
Great. Well, it's really interesting insight for me and probably Darryl as well. I'm sure for the rest of our audience. On that subject, of course, Russia is just spectacularly large across a very wide geographic area, but not only that, culturally, language-wise, different groups of people that look completely different from one side of Russia to the other. I mean, so talk to us a little bit about Russia cultural side in terms of the different ethnic groups that exist within Russia, and how many languages are there? Well, I mean, in Australia, there's about 190 different Aboriginal languages, by the way, as a plug for Australia. So tell us about the Russian scenario.
Well, I think this also has a certain heritage element to it, because when the Soviet Union existed and was much larger than Russia today, and had a bundle of all these nations and ethnic groups. I mean, the central idea was that all the nations that live in Russia, they are equal and they are friends. So I mean, you could really find some really active communists in that era coming back from very, very different ethnical backgrounds. And so it was very, very diverse, and it was very, very equal. And I think it pretty much remains the same today, because it's not surprising to see people from Kazakhstan or from some ethnic groups from the west of Russia to be working in large companies. So it's quite diverse, I would actually say. I don't know if Alex maybe has got something to add to this one.
Yeah, I think similar to Australia, we have around 190 different nationalities, different ethnicities that are still living in Russia, because of course Russians are still the major and the biggest population that we have, but we are pretty much diverse, especially in the north, in the Far East, in the southern region with Caucasus Mountains. A lot of it are really different cultures, and I think that a lot of it has been assimilated in terms like both Andrey and I, when we look at Georgian food, for example, we think it's normal Russian style to have the Georgian food on our table. We don't shy away even from for example, Central Asian foods or the ones that are coming from currently Baltic states, because when we were all together, I think a lot of those cultural things that really got assimilated and became on this higher national level that people still are following today. And what I'm sure they still are is just only recently, only yesterday, I read a very interesting study about the openness of various countries towards different nationalities and how they can perform and work there and feel discriminated or not. And Russia was always in various questions in top 3 countries where people said it's the most accommodating to different nationalities. It really doesn't matter if you want to be employed, if you want to open up your own business. Nobody will look at the way you look like or what you eat. I was actually not surprised, but it was a source of pride for me that Russia ranks so high in terms of equal opportunity for all nationalities, according to the recent study.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really interesting. And of course, we flip back to the logistics and supply chain space. You've mentioned the enormous variety of weather. And in fact, I tagged you guys a couple of weeks ago. We had a quick Zoom and you were very quick to show me out the window from both of you, 6 feet of snow, and you couldn't see the Kremlin, which you can see, I think, from your place, Alex, just because the amount of snow that was flying around. How does the weather, the extreme weather conditions being so close to the Arctic Circle, impact the massive railway infrastructure, for example? Does it close down, as we've seen recently in Europe with the huge disruptions going on there with their worst weather for 15 years? How do you get by?
Not just rail, but in air as well. I mean, surely that would affect the air networks, and which is a pivotal line haul mechanism for fresh produce, right?
What happens, guys?
Well, it's pretty much business as usual, guys. Because we were prepared to live in such harsh and difficult environments. When there is 6 feet of snow, or where there's very harsh and cold weather. I think when we talked, it was minus 30 at that particular time.
I've been told you to say that.
Yeah, true. But life, yeah, but life was still going on. The deliveries were still being made. The logistics industry was still working because our facilities are actually prepared. We build everything like insulated with the access to hot water everywhere, with the insulated pipes. But of course, sometimes when there is extreme blizzard, it affects air operations, airport operations. But I think as everywhere in the world. And in terms of the craziest things that can actually happen is that when we were working with Andrey together at SPSR, and we were delivering to the very northern, to the Arctic Circle, we employed helicopters that used some standard tours and rides between different cities. And then we also received sometimes messages and highlights that the vessels that utilize, what do you call it, basically, I forgot the English word for the specific vessel that hovers above the ground. The hovercraft, exactly. Yeah, so the hovercrafts weren't able to depart because we hover. Yeah, exactly. So when you talk about deliveries being made in some northern places, we employ helicopters and hovercrafts to do that. Of course, they don't belong to the company. I think they are maintained by the region and by the state. But this is the only way you do that. And then you're absolutely right. We're building as a country, a lot of icebreakers exactly to make way for all those ships go around the north. And I think that also a lot of logistics providers are banking on this way, becoming more and more lucrative, more and more efficient in order to haul goods and haul containers from China to Europe, specifically utilizing both the icebreaking fleet and also the climate change that also happens in the north. So yeah, this is one of the craziest cases that we had.
We're talking about Russia, but I feel like given what's happened in the US a few weeks ago, we could easily be talking about Texas, right? Because we're talking about supply disruption. But Alex, what you're describing is actually every year we have an infrastructure that needs to be adaptable and nimble enough to keep that supply chain moving and keep that activity cranking through, right? But, I think it's interesting that, it goes back to the old Fred Smith story from FedEx, right? When he hired the helicopter to bring the mail through, right?
Yeah. So I think we're more prepared because we have been living in those conditions for a lot of years. Yeah. But I also believe that sometimes disruptions do happen because of extreme weather. You just have to take it as the force majeure.
Well, guys, these insights I personally am finding extremely interesting, and I hope our audiences as well. And I can see us coming back and revisiting a number of these issues down track. So this won't be the only time we'll be talking to you. But look, we can just look to the issue of moving forward now. I mean, the world has had a lot of disruption over the last 12 months. A lot of organisations have benefited, and many not so much. And of course, we respect the fact that many organisations and people have done it very, very tough over the last 12 months. If we look forward then 21 onwards in the near term to medium term, what do you think the big picture opportunities and issues are for supply chain in the Russian context? What are the one or two things that you think really organisations, whether they be internal legacy organisations inside of the Russian environment economically, or companies, as you guys, all three of you discussed earlier about other companies coming in. What do you think the big opportunities are going to be moving forward over the next year or two?
Well, I think that the outsourcing of the logistics function will accelerate in the upcoming years. So this is one of the things, yeah, and we also see that there's much room for improving really basic service levels of the existing 3PL operators, 3PL and fulfillment operators. These things will be really improving. And actually, for building last mile capacities, I've also listened to various conferences on this, and all the market players there is saying that investments into last mile are crucial in Russia at the moment. So anything that is associated with lockers, with pickup and drop off solutions, with courier networks and various services that these couriers provide, there's not enough saturation in the market at the moment. This will continue in the upcoming years.
Okay, thanks. Alex?
Well, I can only add to that two things. Investments in infrastructure are also crucial, as we discussed today with you guys. A lot of things need to be upgraded in terms of airline capacity, in terms of railroad capacity, and other infrastructural things. And another thing is, of course, we see that the cross-border e-commerce is going to rejuvenate. The state it was in because of COVID in 2020, it's not the way it's been historically. It has always been around 30% of Russian market and growing. So I think there's going to be a lot of recovery growth in the coming months and years. So this is also a good opportunity for the companies to hop on that trail.
Awesome. Darryl, you
I agree with the guys. I think that infrastructure point that Alex raises is just such a great opportunity for organizations looking to get into Russia at this point. I think there was a standout, and guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but I read an article late last year on X5, which is one of your big retailers, not the BMW, the X5, the retail group, and those guys have done so well rolling out their multi-sized footprints around the CIS in Russia. I mean, 3,500 new stores rolled out, last year. A year before that was 4,000. 14,000 footprints now, and that sort of strong retail growth and maturity lends itself to omni-channel, to e-commerce, direct fulfillment opportunities, direct to customer. So I think that's going to be a continuing theme, as it is in many parts of the world. And the other number that stood out for me off the back of the Gulf Foods experience I shared, driven by agriculture, is Russian-European trade is up 24.9% in the last 12 months. That's phenomenal amount of growth. And I think you're going to see increasingly more Russian organizations take what they do domestically and look to export that and to enter more international markets either through partnerships or distributors or even direct themselves. So I think that, for me, they're the two big trends.
Awesome. So what we tend to do, guys, on the show is have a bit of a wrap and ask some questions of most of our guests, in particular with you gentlemen. I'm really interested to know around in regards to doing business in your environment. What would be one or two tips or advisory notes? I mean, you're both very experienced international consultants. You both run consultancies in Russia. And Andrey, you have a bit of a following. So I see the near-term future myself as yourself and potentially Alex as being the go-to guys in Russia, bringing Russian supply chain to the world, quite frankly. I have that.
I think what you're referring to is Andrey's Instagram commentary, right? Which is just going gangbusters in this community.
Yeah, I'm following it. So
yeah, it's a great show. If anyone hasn't connected to him yet on Instagram, they should.
Yeah, so and people will see down below any contact details you want us to give in terms of Instagram for followers. But if we talk just quickly then about one or two advisory points from yourselves for people coming into that market or leaders leading businesses that are engaging from the outside in into the Russian context. What would be one or two things to have top of mind for leaders leading businesses?
Well, I believe that it's actually similar to the Middle East. Yeah, the local partner is very much important because Russia has its own specifics. It doesn't operate really in the same way as another world operates, as we also touched upon in the beginning of our conversation. So finding a good local partner, if of course you're absolutely unfamiliar with Russia, is actually key. They will be able to hold your hand and walk you through all the various issues and points. Like, for example, our personal data law protection is so much different from even the European one that you need to have a local partner to advise you on that and help you navigate those streams in this particular river. So for me, that's number one advice. And the second one, I'm of a bit of a control freak. This is why I would advise for people that enter Russian market, please do not be afraid to localize and build like local representative offices and go into market, because together in conjunction with this particular partner, the more control points you have and the more representation you have in the market, it's only for the better. You'll have a way better connection with the people and with the, partners, distributors, suppliers, whatever have you.
Awesome. Now, the final wrap from me before I just throw to Darryl for any final points was really you're both extraordinarily, well, maybe for Russian standards, not extraordinarily educated, but for the level of formal education and qualifications that you both have, to me is exemplary. So if you're talking about the younger generations, the millennials, Generation Z coming through now, what are the kids learning and what are the things that they're focusing on as they're coming into modern Russian society and being part of the broader international context? So the question is, what are kids in the education system in Russia learning?
They are much better English speakers.
Yeah, okay, good. And what sort of subject matter? What are the sort of skills that they're wanting to learn?
Well, the education as Russia is modernizing and evolutionizing substantially now today. So there are a lot of activities that the kids can do nowadays, and which is very, very popular in Russia. So apart from basic schooling and from the basic subjects they have in school, they attend a lot of various other activities outside that is sports related, that is arts related a lot. Yeah. I see that there's a lot of interest within the young people with a lot of fascination with various IT things and services and opportunities out there.
Awesome.
And I think it's quite beneficial for their future and just to get themselves ready for these evolving jobs for the future.
Okay. Alex, any thoughts about what kids are learning and what they're interested in? Are they interested in the same thing as Chinese or European or US kids, or they've got different focus?
I would, maybe I'm wrong, but I would say that a lot of, young population, their interests are converging to the very same point. They are more or less, looking at the same influencers and followers across Instagram, the world is more and more global now. Yeah. So their thoughts and interests are maybe just, as I said, converging. And yeah, a lot of fascination inside Russia with IT, tech, various those things developments. This is something we've been good at and we continue to be good at in the international sphere. And people really are longing and embracing the young generation of leading this charge there. Yeah, leading the charge of harnessing the power of YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, not only for their own like benefit and promotion, but also to exercise a lot of sales through those methods too as sales channels. They're making, and some of them are making a lot of money just by being live bloggers. So, but I think exactly as you said, Kim, I believe that a lot of interests of the young generation in America, Europe, or China, Russia, or Middle East in that regard, are basically converging.
So we're seeing the implementation of the new echelon of oligarchs in Russia, of the young generation coming through.
I think to Alex's point, Kim, I mean, I think digital has just smashed those boundaries and borders, right? And Alex, you make a very good point when you say, they're looking at the same influences, they're looking at the same marketplaces, they're following the same behaviors as their colleagues in different parts of the world. And I think, that really has been a big shift from perhaps our generation to the next generation. That digital has just taken that away completely.
Well, guys, it's been a fascinating conversation, as Darryl mentioned earlier. It's really intriguing and understanding more about one of the largest countries in the world. Given there's only 100 million of you, that means everybody's got a farm, obviously, over there.
140, yeah.
But
and a big coat. 140 people walk around with big forks and coats, right?
Yeah, but we really do appreciate you taking the time. Thanks for your transparency on a lot of the things that people were very, very keen, I'm sure, to understand. I hope our audience has gained as much information as we have. We really look forward to staying in touch with you and talking to you again. So Andrey, Lukin, Alex Borisov, Darryl, thank you from Dubai as well. And from Russia with love, we wish everybody a good day. Thanks again for all the first responders and all the people in the health systems around the world. Of course, we're in this massive move to vaccinations now. I think that's probably another subject that we can talk to you about next time, see how things are going, because Russia is leading the way with its own production of vaccines as well. Thank you to everybody who's keeping us safe. Please, everybody out there, keep your hands clean, keep your masks on, stay distanced and stay safe. Thanks, gentlemen. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Bye. See you guys. Bye-bye.